Welcome to the Resilient Retail Game Plan, a podcast for anyone wanting to start, grow or scale a profitable creative product business with me, Catherine Erdley. The Resilient Retail Game Plan is a podcast dedicated to one thing, breaking down the concepts and tools that I've gathered from 20 years in the retail industry and showing you how you can use them in your business. This is the real nuts and bolts of running a successful product business, broken down in an easy, accessible way. This is not a podcast about learning how to make your business look good. It's the tools and techniques that will make you and your business feel good. Confidently plan, launch and manage your products, and feel in control of your sales numbers and cash flow to help you build a resilient retail business. Welcome to episode number 128 of the Resilient Retail Game Plan. I'm your host, Catherine Erdley, as well as the founder of the Resilient Retail Club, which is my membership group and consultancy for product businesses. If you've thought about getting some help with your product business, then do check out my one-to-one offerings, which you can find out more about on resilientretailclub.com, or alternatively take a look at the club, which is also available to sign up directly at resilientretailclub.com. And if you use the code 10podcast, that's 10podcast, you can get £10 off your first month. And I would also like to invite you to join us for the free 5-day challenge, which is all about planning your sales for 2023. This is my 4th year running the 5-day challenge in January. It's always hugely popular. Really fantastic energy, lots of great ideas about how to move your business forward, lots of other businesses to bounce ideas off. Come and join us. Go to tinyurl, it's tinyurl.com/sales 2023, sales, SALES 2023. Love to see you there. So today I'm going to be talking to you about 4 trends that will shape retail in 2023. So it is the second week of January, and you may be wondering what on earth is ahead. And that's a fair question because, let's face it, 2022 had its fair share of challenges. Okay, perhaps the worst of the pandemic disruption was out of the way, although, to be honest, it wasn't completely gone. But there were a new set of challenges that really had to be dealt with, specifically as it relates to the cost of living crisis, and specifically the fact that the UK, towards the end of the year, in the 4th quarter, officially moved into a recession, which, as I've spoken about before on the podcast, means that 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP output, gross domestic product. So the outlook for 2023 is certainly that this recession will continue, with the expectation being that we exit the recession early in 2024. So there's lots of questions being raised as to what is going on, what the industry trends are that will really impact businesses, and really how do retailers manage to not only survive, but preferably thrive in 2023. So what I'm going to do today is run you through the points that I worked on, my 4 predictions for the retail industry. This is the basis of an article that I put together on Forbes.com. This is something that I do every year, and it's a really fantastic exercise. I really enjoy it as part of what I do in my business. I get to ask lots of experts their opinion about what's happening, and I hear from lots of different people, from the British Independent Retailers Association to management consultancy firms, trend forecasters, e-commerce experts, product experts, you name it. Then I basically get information from all over the place, and I try and pull it all together and pull out some common themes. Now, this kind of thing can be hugely in-depth. This is a real top-line level overview. For example, if you ever want to dig into real detail, I would definitely recommend, for example, checking out things like Shopify's Future of Commerce, which is a report they produce pretty much every year as well. I mean, it's really in-depth. It is a pretty long, detailed report. The thing I will say as well about the industry trends is that when you look at them year on year, it's not like they're massively different necessarily. For example, one of the things I'm going to talk about is this idea of fandom as opposed to fans instead of customers. This kind of ties into what I talked about last year, which was really all about the importance of loyalty. It's kind of a continuation of the same thing. But I think the other thing that's interesting about the trends is writing about them year on year is just how they shift and they sort of vary in importance from one year to the next. these are my predictions for the rest of 2023. Just to mention as well, I'm going to do another podcast. I think probably next week's podcast, I'm going to talk more specifically about product trends. So that's the kind of things that people will be buying. This isn't really so much about types of products. This is really about industry trends specifically. So just to keep that in mind, as I said, I will get into the detail of that because I heard from people from Pinterest and Etsy, also from Shopify themselves and their data across all of their merchants and what people were buying. And it's really fascinating. So I'm going to dive into that next week. This is more about the top line trends. Also, just a quick reminder that when I use the word retail, I am, of course, talking about you. If you sell products to consumers, then you are a retailer. So even if you don't think you are, even if you think, well, hang on a minute, I wouldn't ever consider myself as part of the retail industry. Well, I've got news for you. You are definitely part of the retail industry. So very briefly, and again, if you came to my trend, I did a talk before Christmas about what's ahead for 2023. I covered these trends as well. And I also gave quite a lot of detail as kind of what's been going on. I'm not going to go into all of that detail. If you do want to see the talk, which, as I said, you get to see some lovely graphs and, of course, see the full presentation. If you want to go check that out, you can go to resilientretailclub.com/workshops/2023. And you can still get the replay there if you want to see that. Then, especially at the beginning, I go into a lot more detail as to what's going on. But just suffice to say, the point that we're starting at here in 2023 is, as I've touched on previously, a time of not only economic uncertainty and low consumer confidence, but also the fact that costs keep going up. So Andrew Goodacre, who's the CEO of the British Independent Retailers Association, who contributed to my article for Forbes, talked about the cost of running a business have increased very sharply. So energy costs are 400% more, wages are 10% more, and there's still supply chain inflation. So really, that's where we're starting at. Consumer confidence low, costs high. So really everything that when you think about being a retailer in 2023, it's got to kind of start from that opening point where it's really all about how do you work around those factors. And the first trend to be aware of, I mean, in part of working around those factors is just being aware of some of these trends. What is going on with your consumer? Now, most of the things that I say, you're not going to necessarily be massively surprised by. These will be things that you've read about in the media, you've thought yourself. But this is just kind of trying to bring it into full focus as to these are the kind of the key things impacting your business in the year ahead. So, reduce consumer spending. That is my first trend, if you like. The word trend, just to say it's not necessarily about, sloths and flamingos. It's not necessarily about specific products or motifs, but it's about industry trends. And I think one thing that we cannot ignore in 2023 is that the consumer discretionary spending is going to be lower. Inflation is set to continue into 2023. And in the UK specifically, we're going to see higher interest rates, which means higher mortgage repayments. We're going to see raises again in the cost of fuel. So the consumer is going to be squeezed. Inflation will eventually come down. That's the forecast towards the end of 2023. But still, that just means it's going to be stabilizing at that higher level. So consumer confidence has been slipping. And really what the retailer has to do is think about how do you continue to sell products that are wanted and needed, but still recognizing that levels of discretionary spending have been hard hit by the current economic climate. Now, I do think that this comes back to something that I've said again and again. I'm going to say it one more time for emphasis. Gift-giving occasions are going to become even more important. So Christmas, that was a message that I was talking about a lot at Christmas. Make sure you're making the most of your Christmas sales. And now as we move into the spring, it means you've got to make the most of your Valentine's Day sales, your Mother's Day sales, Father's Day, Easter, all of those gift-giving occasions that you can think of, people's birthdays, for example, anniversaries, weddings as well. Anytime that people are going to be giving a gift, that you're really catering for that. And the reason for that is that when discretionary spending goes down, people tend to prioritize other people over themselves. So they may not treat themselves to a manicure or a new spring coat as easily as they will say, right, well, actually, I want to still do something nice for my mother, for example, for Mother's Day. Because also they're going to be aware of the fact that their loved ones are under pressure in terms of their discretionary spending. So there definitely will be, in my mind, there will be a renewed emphasis on gifting. Or if you like, the gifting area is going to be more protected than that kind of spontaneous self-purchase. And, that is definitely something that's different from during COVID. During COVID, we saw a lot of self-purchasing, and I just don't think we'll see the same levels. So keep focusing on that gifting. And also because if you're listening to this, you probably run a small business. And if you run a small business, you're probably not competing on price. You're probably competing on desirability. And you probably got a really lovely product that someone would love to get as a gift. So it's very unlikely that you're not a gifting brand in some way, shape or form. So keep thinking about those particular time periods, those gifting opportunities, and making sure that those are really the focus of your marketing campaigns, that you're on the ball, that you don't miss Mother's Day because you were too busy focusing on something else, that you're really planning for that and executing it well. One of the interesting questions that I asked a lot of people when I was working on this piece was I said to them, okay, can you talk me through how does a retailer continue to drive product sales, products that people love, but at the same time trying to maximize their own operational profit or at least maintain it? And one of the people who contributed was a guy called David Camisa, that he is the Boston Consulting Group's managing director and partner. Boston Consulting Group's obviously a very highly regarded management consultancy, and they also do a lot of work on trends and industry forecasting. So David talks about, the consumer is going to be more focused on value for money. So why not simplify the range of products offered? I mean, this really speaks to a lot of what I talk about. So my book, which is coming out on the 21st of February, is currently available for pre-order. Tame Your Tiger. One of the things that I do talk about is managing your stock. And I think that it's going to just become super important. If you want to balance the customer that is very focused on value for money, potentially lower spending, you might have to simplify your range. You really can't. I don't think this is the year that anyone can afford to carry options or products in their range that the people aren't buying. So he also warns against relying heavily on conventional levers that big retailers especially would typically use, such as pushing suppliers or reducing staff costs to try and maintain operational profit. I mean, that is a very common operating model for big retailers. However, he is saying, the supply chains just don't really have the room to deliver cost savings. So it's not necessarily going to be about squeezing your suppliers. So it's really about things like better collaborations with your suppliers to try and work together to keep your costs under control. And also better stock management is something that he calls out. And again, I would completely recognize that as a great opportunity. This, as I said, this just isn't the year to be sitting on a lot of stock. If you think you might have a stock management problem, I really urge you to try and resolve it, because this is not the year to be sitting on any extra tied up cash. You're going to need all the cash you can get in order to help make your way through this year. Andrew Goodacre from BIRA, British Independent Retailers Association, also notes that, value is key, but value is a combination of price, quality and service. Yes, you may need to have offers and product promotions, but not at the expense of your product quality and service. And I think this is really key as well. Yes, when we're talking about a customer that is focused on value for money, it's easy to think to yourself, right, well, maybe it's about running offers and deals, but actually it's really not. That can be brand damaging. You don't want your customer to think that you're always about a discount. It's about thinking about how you can really appeal to their idea of value for money, focus on those gifting opportunities, and also keep your stock really well managed so that you're not in a position of having to heavily discount in order to shift. The second big trend that I don't think any of us can ignore is the rise of resale or secondhand. So broadly speaking, secondhand shopping, if you're wondering what the difference is, secondhand shopping is generally accepted as any time that people are buying things that are not brand new, whereas resale tends to suggest more of a curated range. So resale, people would have sifted through lots of secondhand product to pull together a range that would appeal to their particular customer. The statistics on secondhand shopping are really quite eye-opening, particularly when it comes to apparel, where there seems to be most data. The global apparel resale market grew an estimated 30.1% in 2022, given that overall retail spend was at very best flat on the year. It grew 30.1% to 182.4 billion worldwide, according to the data and analytics company Global Data. This growth is set to continue. There's a forecast of 85.5% growth between 2022 and 2026. So they're looking at a global apparel resale spend of 338.4 billion by 2026. There are lots of people springing up who are offering marketplaces, platforms, offering secondhand goods. Technology is making it easier for brands to implement their own resale. And I think it's just going to keep going. I think the other thing that is really interesting, and personally, I have a 15-year-old, and one of his favorite things to do with his friends is to go around charity shops and vintage shops. And actually, pretty much everything he buys is secondhand. And I think that's really interesting when I compare that to when I was 15, when it was sort of like pretty much the highest stigma possible to be charity shopping. Maybe that's just where I grew up, but it was definitely not considered cool. So resale ticks two very important boxes. It both is obviously much cheaper, or at least somewhat cheaper than buying new. And it is also environmentally friendly option because you're not purchasing new goods, or alternatively, you're keeping something out of landfills. So it is really appealing to a couple of different types of customers. And for that reason, and the fact that it's getting more and more popular, especially with younger generations, means that resale is going to just continue to be a major force in the retail industry. So what does it mean for you? And I think this is a really interesting question. And I think that I would suggest that you take a few minutes to kind of pose that question to yourself, because resale isn't going to work for everybody. It's not going to work for every type of business. It can be quite hard. The supply chain can be quite hard. So if you want to source your own goods to resell, then that can be quite time consuming and not as profitable as you might think, especially as the whole sort of industry heats up. So I think you can think about resale and whether or not it works for you. But I think what I find interesting about resale and why it's grown so much is that also it points to this growing circular economy, which we've been talking about the circular economy in the retail industry for at least the last 5 years, if not the last 10 years, but it is becoming more and more prominent in consumers' minds. And that's really thinking about all of the different ways that they can be more circular. So sustainability is interesting. It didn't kind of crop up as a trend so much anymore in a lot of the reports that I read. And I queried this with a few of the people that I was getting the information from. And their answer was often, well, it's almost become second nature to the consumer. It's almost like sustainability's gone beyond being a trend. It's something that most consumers, or a large proportion of consumers, expect or think about when it comes to their purchasing. And circular economy is, yes, there's resale, but there's also reusing, refilling, repairing, renewing, upcycling. All of these things are circular economy behaviors that even if it doesn't work for you to incorporate a secondhand section into your business, are you thinking about the circularity of your goods? Are you thinking about how they can be refilled, reused? Are you shouting about it? If you are able to refill your products, if you do offer a lifetime repair guarantee, all of these things, are really worth considering how you communicate this to your customer. This idea of value for money isn't always about the cheapest option. It can also be about, actually, this item will last you a really long time. So definitely something to think about for all retailers, whether or not there's a way of putting more circular options into their business model, whether or not that's resale or something else. The third big trend then was the evolution of e-commerce. And it was really interesting writing this piece because e-commerce, when I wrote last year in 2021, it was kind of the undisputed winner from the pandemic was e-commerce and how it had flourished. And at that point, people were talking about how the trend towards e-commerce had been accelerated by 3 years compared to the trajectory that it was on pre-pandemic. However, this year, e-commerce as a percentage of total retail sales, so that means for every £1 spent in retail, the number of pence that was spent online, that has shown a decline month on month for the last 11 months. It spiked up again in November and December, which is fairly typical. It pretty much always jumps up at Christmas. But if you look at it from January or from December last year, month on month, and if you want to go check and look at this yourself, the Office of National Statistics, the ONS, is a great place to go for a lot of this information. It's where I usually get this graph from. You can see that it declined throughout the year. And that is because basically people were getting more used to, more comfortable going back out into stores. It's also meant that if you're a pure play e-commerce person, it may have felt difficult. Life may have felt more difficult in 2022. There's also been all the shifts in social media marketing, higher costs of acquisition, changes to privacy, which mean that it's harder to attribute whether or not ads are working, and digital marketing. So all of those things combined have meant that for a lot of people, e-commerce has felt quite different in 2022. So what does that mean for 2023? Well, again, according to David Camisa from Boston Consulting Group, he really wasn't that concerned about, it's not like the death of e-commerce. So he says, it was expected to see some of the spend flow back to physical shopping. However, shopping online is generally sticky as a behavior. I love that phrase. So new habits will have been formed, sustaining volumes for the next years. And he talks about, e-commerce on the demand side, it's still all there. It's more convenient, provides more choice. Service levels are ever rising. In many categories, it's cheaper, and increasingly customer demographics are attuned to online. So I expect to continue seeing long-term growth. So I don't think we're saying here, and I agree with what he's saying, that fundamentally people will still be drawn to shopping online. However, I think the rapid growth we saw during the pandemic, we can now be firmly assured that that is not going to continue, and it has been declining. So for me personally, I think that if you're an e-commerce brand, you really need to be thinking about diversifying your income streams, thinking about wholesale, for example, if you haven't done that before, or thinking about in-person events if you've not done those before, thinking just about all the different ways that you can access customers. I think it's also really interesting to see, maybe this is a little bit longer term, but we've had so many issues with postal strikes this year. This year for sure has been the worst disruption to the Christmas shopping experience. So again, from a purely personal standpoint, my children's gifts did not make it for Christmas. And though I completely support the postal workers strike, and I completely understand why it happened, whereas I would have been fairly reliant on online shopping for at least a big portion of my Christmas shopping, I think definitely this year I will think twice about it, or I'll buy even earlier. It is interesting to see what impact the strikes will have long-term on e-commerce. But I definitely think that e-commerce as I said, there was a certain model that worked really, really well in 2020 and 2021. And I think in 2022, it was harder. And that model was like lots of paid advertising, pretty much purely online. And I think that it will be something that just simply won't be the same moving forward. I think that it will mean more diverse income streams, lots of different ways to market, potentially physical presence, especially for a local audience. Understanding that the reason that shops have worked for thousands of years is that actually to be in a physical presence where people can walk past is very powerful, and it can also help drive your online sales as well. So I think that this rebalance, as I said, it's not to be dramatic and say this is it for e-commerce. I think, e-commerce definitely has a future. But I think what we're seeing is that we almost have to, again, go back to that almost 2019 as the comparison year. Obviously, it has advanced since 2019, but not the way that it's leapt forward, say, in 2020, 2021. I expect in 2023, we'll continue to see e-commerce rebalancing. And I think I would just be very mindful of that if I were you and I were only selling online. Just really asking yourself, where else can you sell? Is there a rebalancing that you need to do in terms of your business, and perhaps engaging more with a local consumer, or looking to get into more of a physical presence, or expanding your physical presence? Okay, so the fourth point then I wanted to make about the retail industry. This is a really, really kind of deep, rich vein, which I could talk about in a lot more detail than I'm going to cover here. But I wrote a piece in the spring of last year where I had a chat with the CEO of a company called Spring, which is a product company. It's almost like a print on demand or manufacture on demand almost for the creator economy. So this is people like YouTubers, the one I use as the example in the article. And actually, it was a podcast episode as well with Chris LaMontagne from Spring, I think from March or April last year. It's really fascinating conversation. So if you feel like going back and having a listen, then I definitely recommend it. I can't tell you the episode number off the top of my head, but I'm guessing it's probably somewhere around 80-ish. The example that we used in this conversation was Mariah Elizabeth, who is a YouTuber. She does lots of crafts, painting, and she also sells merch. She sells, for sure, the sort of typical T-shirts and things like that, but she also has more involved products. So my daughter is a big fan, and she ordered this Mariah Elizabeth yearbook that was then manufactured and shipped by Spring. And what was just really fascinating about this conversation was really this notion of having fans as opposed to customers. It also ties into a lot of other shifts in the e-commerce industry. So when you think about e-commerce and you think about everything that I talked about in the previous trend, this idea of it evolving and maybe not being this fast growth trajectory that it was on in 2020 and 2021, I think it's also really important to acknowledge that although e-commerce, the percentage of retail sales that is being spent online has decreased, we've seen a growing market share in more interactive forms of e-commerce. So social commerce, where you're able to buy directly from a social media platform, and also live streaming, which is particularly popular, for example, on TikTok, where creators are able to go live and talk about their products. And it's like a sort of modern day QVC, if you like, but on a much more decentralized basis. So creators are effectively selling live because they're the perfect people to sell. They are comfortable behind the camera. They are used to creating content, and they often have a really highly engaged following. So I think for me, these kind of two things are meshing together. There's this idea that people increasingly want to buy not just from a brand, rather than a brand, say a legacy brand like Debenhams, for want of a better example. I mean, not that Debenhams was ever a particularly good example, but rather than a brand, they want to buy from a creator that they follow, like Mariah Elizabeth. They want to buy something that almost is like an in-joke or like a super specific to somebody who follows that creator. And I think that kind of also ties into, for me, this is also a lot about trust, because there are a lot of people who've lost trust in bigger businesses, in the way that their marketing is conducted, the way there's a lot of skepticism around everything, really, a lot of messaging, a lot of skepticism about ads. So people are less trustworthy less accepting of something they see in an ad. They're much more likely to buy something because it was a recommendation from somebody that they followed for a long time and trusted, like a creator, than a third-party ad, if you like. So lots of different shifts here. And again, we have to look to the future. And I think a lot of the younger consumers are also doing the same thing. They would much rather buy from somebody who is someone they trust, someone that they follow for a long time, rather than a faceless brand. It's this kind of a culmination of something that I've talked about previously as well, about how this idea of commerce and entertainment blurring, the lines blurring. And that was something that came up last year when I did this trend report for 2022. Amir Kambara, who is the head of product, or was the head of product at Shopify, was talking about this notion of entertainment and commerce, the lines really blurring. And I think it's the same thing here. It's like a certain element to which people want to watch. They want to get product suggestions from someone they trust and buy from them, or they just want it to be a bit more interactive. And one of the people that I spoke to, or I got commentary from for this trend piece, was somebody who runs a platform called Comment Sold. Their CEO, or there's their chief product officer, Andrew Chen, and he was giving some incredible stats about live selling. So, for example, he said that many of their shops that use live selling will see customers that are coming back 5 times in a month to buy from the same people, as opposed to a typical e-commerce business, which maybe will get someone coming back 3 or 4 times a year. The other thing about these very entertaining forms of e-commerce is that they are really good for retention, for loyalty. It's about going beyond just somebody wanting to shop from you because they like your things. There's also then people buying into you as a person. I think the thing that gets tricky here is if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm not great behind the camera, like, how do I even do this? I think it will also see the development of more what I would call almost decentralized forms of advertising. So at the moment, obviously, if you want to promote your products, then you will be looking to, if you're using Google ads or social media ads, then you go to the platform, you're paying that platform and they're pushing it. Whereas TikTok already has a model through TikTok Shop where any creator can promote your products and then they take a cut of the sales. So effectively like affiliate marketing, which has been around forever, but this is almost like the next level. And I think we're going to see the development of more platforms, more technologies, and more ways of pushing it out there, making it really super simple for you to engage with creators who are then able to talk about your products and maybe create content around it. And then effectively the money that you might have otherwise been spending on ads, you're effectively spending on influencers or content creators, whatever you want to call them. But I think that it will almost be coming as like a peer-to-peer sales as opposed to going through these big centralized platforms. So it'll be really interesting. And there's already been sort of some platforms playing around with things like where they monetize, they actually give, they say to consumers, actually, well, why don't we pay you to surf rather than us paying the ad companies? That it's like they're going directly to the consumer and they're saying, well, we'll give you some of that cut of that money that would otherwise be spent pushing this ad to you if you just go and look at it. So there's all these different models, which I think we'll see shifting. But again, I think it all kind of ties back to this trust idea. People are going to buy from people that they trust. They're going to buy from people that they believe that what they're saying. And I think that for some legacy brands, that's going to be harder to do because ultimately it's harder to perhaps to be relatable and trustworthy seeming if you're a big multinational, whereas for a small business, that should be easier. So I think in terms of what does this mean for your business, I think it just really goes to show the power of community. I think big businesses have been trying for a long time to build communities, and small businesses naturally build communities just by the virtue of the fact that you often are having one-to-one conversations with people. But absolutely, I feel like community, loyalty, retention, this is something that I've talked about probably every year since I've been doing these trend reports. But I think that it just goes to show it's becoming more and more important. And interestingly, the Shopify report, the Future of Commerce, one of the things that they called out as a great way to grow, which I loved because I talk about this all the time, is they talked about collaborations. They talked about the importance of collaborating with other brands who share your values and getting in front of their audience and sharing audiences effectively. It was great to see that as one of their top tips, and it's something that I've talked about for a long time because it's all based on authenticity. I think that's really important. I know it's a word that gets bandied around a lot, but I think that really, truly in 2023, the consumer wants to buy from people that they believe, that they trust. And I think the more that you can do to think about how you build that trust, the better. Also really important to understand that things like third-party data, so things like cookies, for example, are being eliminated from a lot of platforms. Changes in privacy happening. So it's really, really important for you to be collecting your first party data, which is your email addresses. That's also a really big piece of this, is making sure that you are building a community. And most importantly, you've got a way of talking to your community that you control, that you're not reliant on a network or a platform for. Because heaven forbid that something would happen or you get locked out of your Instagram account, or who knows, maybe Elon Musk will buy Instagram next, or not that I think that's going to happen. But what had happened with Twitter, I think it's a really interesting cautionary tale. A lot of you will not have been necessarily been building your business on Twitter. I know some people do use it, but not necessarily very many product businesses. And I think that it's really interesting to see what happened there, and just reflecting on what would happen if that happened to Instagram, and where would that leave you with a platform with declining numbers, or the very erratic behavior by the people who run it. All of these things, it just goes to show that you don't want to be building your business on somebody else's platform. So make sure you're collecting those email addresses. So there you have it. That's my rundown for the what's ahead for 2023. As I said, if you head over to resilientretailclub.com/workshop/2023, you can get the replay of the talk if you want to see even more detail, as well as the graphs. Otherwise, I would really love you to join me for the 5-day challenge, which is happening on the 23rd to the 27th of January. Can't wait to see you there. If you head over to tinyurl.com/sales2023, then you'll be able to sign up. And if you have a moment to like and review the podcast in iTunes, that would be amazing. And if you're in Spotify app, you can rate the podcast. According to my Spotify end of year wrap, the podcast got 5 stars rating on Spotify, which is very exciting, and was in the top 10% of the most followed podcasts in the world, which is pretty mind-blowing. So thank you. If you already follow, thank you. And if you don't, why not hit the follow button and you'll be the first to know about every new episode. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, then I invite you to check out resilientretailclub.com. The Resilient Retail Club is the membership for anyone wanting to start, grow, or scale a profitable product business. No more trawling Google trying to find the answers to your questions or wading through general business advice that speaks mainly to service-based businesses. Whether you're still at the idea stage or you've been going for a while but want to get more focused and organised when it comes to your business, the Resilient Retail Club is the place for you. With a library of courses tailored to creative product businesses, several live sessions a month, and a supportive and active community, the Resilient Retail Club is the perfect membership to help you hit your goals faster. Check it out at resilientretailclub.com.